Welcome to Couple Crush. In today's video, you're going to learn how to cut an off-shoulder bustier. Please stay tuned. In my previous video, you must have seen how I cut a bustier, although it wasn't an off-shoulder. So in this very video, you're going to learn how to cut it as an off-shoulder. So stay tuned. Please, if you like anything about the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, like, share, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so that you get updated anytime I drop a new video. So here are my lines. The first one is the off shoulder line that I've created. I have taken out 5 inches. That's where I want my off shoulder to start, and I have here 10 inches. That's for the bust line, and the under bust line is 13.5. Actually, the under bust measurement is 14.5. Remember, in the previous video I explained how to go about it, so I subtracted 1 inch to make it 13.5. Then I have 16.5 inches as my half length. Then the rest I have their joining allowance here. So to continue, I've already drawn out my apex line, that is nipple to nipple. Half of it is 4 inches. Here I have it 4.5, because the half inch here is for the half inch that I've added is for the sewing allowance. So I've already added all my allowances here. Then to start with, from the calculation I made, my bust is 40 inches and the under bust is 34 inches. So I've added for the front. This is the front, and we are starting from the front. So to start with, I have my shoulder line here already. So I'm going to place my bust measurements. I'm not going to place 10 inches because I have to subtract 1 inch from the back to the front to give me 11 inches. So this is 11 inches. I'm going to mark 11 inches here. Then for the under bust, I have 34 inches. 34 divided by 4 gives me 8.5 inches. So I'm going to mark the 8.5 inches here. Then for the half length, that's the same thing I'm going to take here. Alright, so for the first of all, I'm going to create the cup shape since it is a bustier. So to create the cup shape, I've already explained earlier. So go back to the video that I uploaded earlier. You're going to see what I'm trying to do here. So after that, I'm going to connect these dots. After connecting the dots, then I'm going to curve out these points to the bust point using my curved ruler. Then after creating this curve here, the next thing for me to do is to place my where I want to connect the dart to. So I'm going to take, since I took 4.5 inches here, I'm going to take 5.5 inches here. Then I'm going to connect the line to the bust line this way. Then the next thing for me to do is to create the dart from the upper chest. So I'm just going to take my dart intake will be just 1 inch. Then I will now connect it down here. This part though, you may decide to use a curved ruler, but I prefer a straight ruler because of what I'm trying to achieve here. So you may decide to use a curved ruler. So this is what I've gotten. If you notice here, I did not really bring the curve up to the bust point. I took it down for about half an inch before I connected the curve. So if you want this the bust of your client is really voluminous, that is big, you may decide to make this cup to be more fuller by turning your ruler to this other side this way. And you can see that if you keep it this way, it will really bring out a kind of another shape, but mine, I prefer it this way. Then since I have taken the dart intake here, the shoulder line will not remain at this point, so I have to replace it. The 1 inch that I have taken away from here, the shoulder was 8 inches, that's 15 inches plus half an inch seam allowance, 7.5 plus half an inch seam allowance. So what we're going to do here is to replace this dart, then also add in sewing allowance. So that intake is 1 inch, and the sewing allowance for joining this dart is 1 inch. So the shoulder is going to move from here to 2 inches. Then I'm going to connect it. So this is our new shoulder. So we'll now ignore this part here because we're not making use of it anymore. Then another thing we're going to do here is to, I have already placed my 11 inches here at the bust point. So I'm going to, since it is going to be split open, what I'm going to do is to replace just 1 inch for joining allowance and 1 inch for my seam allowance. That gives us 2 inches here. Alright, then the under bust, remember I've taken 3 inches here, that's 3 inches here, so I'm going to replace the 3 inches plus 1 inch for the joining allowance and 1 inch for my seam allowance. So since I had 8.5 here, 8.5 plus 3 is 11.5 plus 1, 12.5, and plus 1, that's the sewing allowance, that will be 13.5. So we can still calculate it again. Let's do it together. We have here my under bust is 8.5 here plus these 3 inches, that will be 11.5. Then plus 1 inch for joining allowance, that will be 12.5, and 1 inch for my seam allowance, that's for the side seam allowance, it gives us 13.5, and that's what I have put here. Then another thing is to place the same 13.5 at the half length here. So in the shoulder, on the shoulder line, we'll practically place whatsoever we have here plus half an inch. Here we had 13 inches plus half an inch, so I'm going to add half an inch to the 13 inches to give me 13.5. So I'm going to connect from this point straight to this other point, since approximately everything falls at 13.5 inches. So this is what we have, and I'm going to create the armhole cuff. The armhole cuff. So we have here, I need to take away the allowance, the seam allowance that I added here. So that's 1 inch. So that's where I'm going to create the armhole cuff. Here from this point down here. So practically this is what I have as my front part of it. So the next thing is to label it. This is the center front and this is the side front. So I'm going to cut this as the green line. The side front I'm going to cut 2 inches, 2 pieces, 1 times 2. That's the same thing I have here. This is going to be on fold, so that I will not forget that I'm going to cut the center point on fold. So I'm going to cut just 1 piece since it is going to be on fold. So the next thing is to cut it out. So remember that I have added the allowances already. So when I'm going to cut it on the material, I will not need to add any allowance. So this is what we have for the front part. So we are going to move over to the back part now. For the back part, I have placed everything in place, as in I created a dart. Practically I did everything that I did, the same thing I did for the front. So let us move over to the drafting of the shoulder. I mean the shoulder darts, but there will be no darts, sorry, there will be no darts for the shoulder. All we are going to do here is to check the front part here. What we had for the front, here we have 5 inches, so we are going to transfer it to the back, the same 5 inches. So you're going to mark the 5 inches there and connect it down to this point, to the bust line. Since there will be no shoulder dart, I have already placed the waist dart. So since I have marked out this, it means that this place will be open. So the next thing to do is to transfer the allowance here to the shoulder, and that will be, the sewing allowance will be just 1 inch. So I'm going to transfer it here to the shoulder, the 1 inch. So that is where the new shoulder line will be. That is where the new shoulder line will be. So I'm going to connect it with a ruler. Then the next thing is to place the circumference around. Remember, I took away 1 inch from the bust front, I mean from the bust back. That would have been 10 inches, but since I subtracted 1 inch, it's going to be 9 inches. 9 inches plus 1 inch sewing joining allowance and 1 inch seam allowance, that will be 11 inches. So you mark the 11 inches here. Then for the waistline, we have 8.5. 8.5 plus this 1 inch dart intake and 1 inch joining allowance, then 1 inch for sewing allowance. That will be approximately, this is 3 inches already, are going to add extra. So that gives us 11.5. So after marking 11.5, I'll come to the shoulder line, transfer whatsoever I have on the bust line, then I add my ½ inch to the shoulder line here. That will be 11.5 here. Then after that, I'm going to connect it with a straight ruler. Then I'll place the armhole. So that is the armhole. The next thing is to cut it out. Remember that I'm cutting this pattern with the seam allowance. So while cutting it on the real material, this is the zip allowance. Sorry, let me write it in bold. That's the zip allowance. So this is what we have for the back, and this is what we have for the front. So thank you very much for staying tuned. Please, you're going to see I'm going to cut this on the material and also cut it in the full garment, the full outfit, because it's going to be a gown on the material. So please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel so as to get my video whenever I upload it. Don't forget to turn on the notification. Thank you very much. Bye bye for now.